Well, Mother Nature has decided to wreak havoc on almost every corner of the U.S. and everywhere in between to start this week. So batten down the hatches, friends. The winds of change have also blown through Big 12 country this week, and we have new TV news for college women's basketball. We are talking about it, all of it today, right here on Locked On Women's Basketball.
Ogunbowale for the win.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.
Cheers, friends. It is Monday, January 8th, 2024, and there is a winter storm apparently named Finn barreling down on many of us around the U.S. today. So with the College Football National Championship tonight in Houston, there might not be a better time to hunker down, talk about college basketball, and then decide who gets the nod you pick, Huskies or Wolverines tonight. Hi, everybody. I am Missy Heidrich, National Women's Basketball Correspondent here at The Next. Thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, all capital letters, for $20 off your first purchase. Well, you can follow me at Missy Heidrich, and be sure to follow this podcast at Locked On WBB, and then come see all of my amazing colleagues at The Next, www.thenexthoops.com. And that's where you'll also find my weekly column about all things college basketball this winter. So a week ago, things looked very different in the new look Big 12. There were multiple undefeated teams on the season, and now there is just one. But we have 4 teams who are undefeated in conference play. We've had players go down, others step up, some return. It's already its own form of madness, and it is just a week and a half old. Who's stepping up? Who draws our concern? What does the next week bring? And we will talk about all of that. And I also want to dive into the new television deal that was struck by the NCAA last week for the NCAA women's basketball tournament moving forward. What does it mean on paper? And if we read between the lines. But first, let's talk about the Big 12. Well, a week ago, as I said, there were 4 teams that were sitting undefeated, and we're in pretty good shape. Now, Baylor is just one of 4 remaining undefeated teams in Division I. However, 4 Big 12 teams have not lost a game to a team outside of the AP top 10. That would be Kansas State, Texas, and West Virginia. So this is high-level success and high-quality basketball that we are seeing in the Big 12. The new AP poll just released. It is just about 12:15 Central Time, my time here in Kansas City. And yes, there are snowflakes coming down outside. But as it sits today in this new Week 10 AP poll, 4 Big 12 teams in the top 25. Baylor at number 4, Texas at number 10, Kansas State down a spot to number 12, and West Virginia holds steady at 24. TCU did drop out because they dropped 2 games in the Big 12 play, and we will talk about the Horned Frogs in just a moment. But we have to start, I think, with the Baylor Bears because they have been the most consistent and obviously having the most success right now. They had a huge win at Texas to open Big 12 play right before the New Year's holiday on the 30th. They win on the road 85-79. I think that was a statement win for this Baylor squad. Now, keep in mind, this is a Texas team that is without Rory Harmon. They look incredibly different, but finding their footing without their All-American point guard. And I think Vic Schaefer would absolutely attest to that. He's had players step up. We'll talk about the Longhorns in just a little bit. But this is a Baylor squad that with also a very big statement win at TCU, 71-50, with a Horned Frog squad that was peaking, getting all sorts of national attention with the retool that Mark Campbell has done. but it looks very different now. And that is because Sedona Prince broke her finger in that Baylor game on the 3rd. She did not play in their last game. We'll talk about the Horned Frogs as well later. And then another big win for Baylor on the 6th over the weekend at home against Houston, 87-58. So this is a Baylor squad, 14-0 overall, 3-0 at the top of the Big 12 league. Why? Everyone wants to know. Well, this team can score. It's about 81 points a game right now in conference play, and they're holding their opponents to just under 65. They're shooting almost 51% from the field and almost 47% from behind the three-point line. I think the message has always been, when this Baylor squad can put it together offensively, they are really, really good. And Nikki Collin has a system. It's based on a lot of WNBA principles, whether it's going to be high ball screens and how they play off of that, but getting players into space of which they can operate and then they can be successful. Absolutely has done that. Sarah Andrews, who I feel may be one of the most underrated guards in the nation. She leads this team in conference play right now at over 15 points a game, but there are 4 Baylor Bears averaging double figures. Andrews, Bella Fauntleroy, Yaya Fedler, Deanna Edwards, and Jada Walker, who has been a huge transfer for them coming in over from Kentucky. She's at just under 10 points per game. But I really like what this Baylor team has done. They've also been able to establish themselves on the backboard. They've rebounded their opponents, not by huge margins, but sometimes it's just 1 or 2 that might be all of the difference, and especially on the offensive end. So everybody keep your eyes on the Baylor Bears, and they have moved in to the top 5 in the country, and they sit at number 4 this week. And oh, by the way, the best start that Baylor has had in the 3 years that Nikki Collin has now been the head coach in Waco. And they opened their new arena last week. So all sorts of great happenings going on in Baylor. Again, do not take your eyes off the Bears. The other teams that are undefeated in Big 12 play, Kansas State, Iowa State, and Oklahoma. First for the Wildcats, it was their first 3 games to start Big 12 play, all new members of the Big 12. They were at Cincinnati, they had Houston at home, and they were at UCF and a trip to Orlando. 3 wins for the Cats, maybe not necessarily some of their best basketball, but doing just enough to get by. And as the note said, they're one of 4 Big 12 teams that have not lost a game to a team outside of the AP. And that is one of the things I think for Kansas State that is a huge factor for them. You look at their stock continues to rise. The only blemish on that 15-1 record is the loss to Iowa after they had beaten the Hawkeyes and Caitlin Clark in Iowa City on their home court. The rematch 10 days later in November on a neutral court at a tournament in Florida. They didn't get the win, but this is a very, very good Kansas State team. And with Ioka Lee, the 6'6" All-American inside, she is the biggest piece of the puzzle. As she goes, this team will go throughout the rest of the season because she changes things. She changes how people have to defend them. She changes how they can defend because you automatically have cleanup and help on that back line. And she is a beast on the boards, as everybody knows. She is tough to move out of the way. Big matchups coming for Kansas State this week. They have Oklahoma and Texas, but both of those at home. Can that home court advantage at Bramlage Coliseum be a thing for the Cats? We will see. But you have to continue to keep your eye on this K-State squad. They're in at number 12 in the national polls in the AP poll this week. The other 2 teams undefeated right now. This is an Iowa State squad at 3-0, 10-4 overall, and Oklahoma at 3-0. They are 9-5 overall. First for the Sooners, I felt like this is just where they are starting to get their footing. They had their game on the 3rd where they had 4 in double figures and a win at BYU. And sometimes I take notice of the road wins because that's one of the things you have to have success in any league. You're going to have to hold home court and you got to steal a couple on the road. Well, they did exactly that out in Provo. It was the 4 in double figures, even though they didn't shoot the ball incredibly well. It was their defense that helped them. 29% on the game for BYU against Oklahoma on the 3rd, and they get that win 75-63. This is a balanced squad for Jenny Baranczyk. They look very different than they did a year ago without all of her super seniors and that experience. But when you have players like Skylar Van and you've got Nevaeh Tot back, and they get some of those players that did put in a ton of time for them a year ago, they really do have complementary pieces. Keep your eye on Peyton Verhulst, Lexi Keys, the transfer from Oklahoma State, Verhulst, the transfer from Louisville, all being a big impact players right now for Oklahoma. What's next for the Sooners, you ask? Well, I can tell you is that their next games, as we said, on the 10th is at Kansas State this week on Wednesday, and then they're home hosting Texas Tech on the 13th. Now, we've got to talk about the Iowa State Cyclones because I really do feel like this is a surging squad for Bill Finley. They have maybe one of the youngest rosters in the country, by far the youngest roster in the Big 12. And then the injury bug bit, and Emily Ryan unavailable to start this season. They're one main returning senior and one of the best point guards in the country. She wasn't there. So these young players have been thrown into the fire and they have figured out a way to respond. They've found their footing. And so much of that comes from being able to play at home. But you also have to give credit because this Iowa State squad has gone on the road and they have figured out a way to win. They did exactly that on the 6th when they played at BYU as well. A big second quarter where they were outscored in the second quarter by BYU 17-10, even though they were up at half. But then a 25-18 third quarter, establishing themselves 5 in double figures. They out rebound BYU, even though it was a double yet again for Lauren Gustin for the Cougars with 14 boards, and 14 points. But the 5 in double figures led by Addie Brown, who I think is one of the most complete and steady freshmen in the Big 12 that you will see. Now, Emily Ryan back in action for the Cyclones. She played 21 minutes in that game. It's been sporadic. She hasn't played a whole lot, probably over 20 to 25. We'll see if that number continues to increase. But when she is in the game, it is a huge difference maker for the Cyclones. What is next? Well, they've got West Virginia at home on the 10th. And then they have Baylor at home on the 13th. So keep your eye on all of those. Okay, when we come back, we are going to talk more about the teams and the players that have our eye, both in a good way and a bit of in a bad way in the Big 12. So have you ever been frustrated trying to scour the internet for tickets to your favorite team or that favorite concert that you want to go to? As many of you know who listen here, I live in the Kansas City area, so it's NFL playoff time here, and the fans are searching high and low for Kansas City Chief tickets to the wild card weekend. You shouldn't have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. You see the view on your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. You can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. So download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Hi, everybody. I am Missy Heidrich, and welcome back. And thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for your 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. So go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Well, I'm Missy Heidrich, and thank you so much for joining me today here on Locked On Women's Basketball. We're walking through the first 10 days or so of what has been craziness and madness in the Big 12. As we started with a bunch of teams that were undefeated overall and going into the first week or so, now that hasn't necessarily happened. But all 14 teams played last week on Wednesday, January 3rd and Saturday, January 6th. So we have seen everyone in action so far and really had a feel for what these teams have done. Everybody's played 3 games. Now the schedules will change a little bit. Everyone's going to get an off here or there and again, because this is an 18 game schedule, not a round robin setup as it has been in the past, because there's 14 teams in the league this year. That changes a year from now. We'll talk about that way down the road, but this is the last year in the Big 12 for Oklahoma and Texas, 2 teams that continue to establish themselves at the top part of this league. We've already talked about the Sooners. They are 3-0, 9-5 overall. Now, the Texas Longhorns, they are 2-1. This is a group that has been dealt a blow. As many people know, and for those of you that haven't, Rory Harmon, their All-American point guard, out for the season with an ACL, and heartbreaking injury for her, and really for the league and for women's basketball, because I think Rory Harmon might be just one of the most dynamic guards in the game. She has a motor that does not stop, and so she is going to be missed. This Texas team, they dropped the game at home against Baylor to open Big 12 play on December 30th. That was an 85-79 win for Baylor, but then they have gotten back on track, and it's been two big wins that I think kind of helped them find their footing. Both of them on the road, ironically, at Texas Tech, where they won 74-47, and then at West Virginia, who at the time was undefeated, and that was a 70-49 win over the Mountaineers. And we look at that game right there, and I think, what was the difference? Well, one thing Vic Schaefer doesn't necessarily have a ton of right now is depth. However, he is getting quality guard play from veterans, and that is in Shea Holley, who has had to step into the starting lineup without Rory Harmon available, and Shaylee Gonzalez. Shaylee Gonzalez was the newcomer of the year last season in the Big 12. She had transferred from BYU. She has nursed a knee injury herself over the course of the last couple seasons, but this is a young woman who steps up and makes plays. She's a shooter, she's a scorer, but she can also be a distributor, and Shea Holley doing the same thing. They've gotten huge minutes and a big bump from Madison Booker. Now without Harmon in the lineup, Booker becomes probably more of a marquee scorer and has to be for Texas, but the freshman comes in with all of the accolades, and she is living up to the billing. You see what her game does. Mid-range, can get to the rim, and can score. And also, Aaliyah Moore being reinserted more into the lineup. She missed last season with her own injury issues, but she's back. Taylor Jones missed a couple games inside, who had been the leading scorer for this Texas squad. She was back in that West Virginia game and was able to give them just about 21 minutes. Now, they win 70-49 on the road at West Virginia, but went just 3 of 7 from behind the three-point line. So if that tells you where the focus of this offense is, it's going to be to attack when they have the matchups right inside, and then force teams to have to beat them out in transition. 32 of their total points were in the paint, and they got a 20-point bump off their bench. But yet it's always been about defense for Texas. They're going to apply pressure, and they are going to make you miserable. They did just that to West Virginia. They held them to 9 points in the second quarter and 7 points in the third quarter. A great defensive effort from Vic Schaefer's squad. What's next for the Longhorns? Well, it is home with TCU, and then they are at Kansas State on the 13th, where they will go up against another AP top 25 team. We will see how they will respond against the Horned Frogs at home and heading back out on the road. We mentioned TCU. This is a squad that came into Big 12 play undefeated. They won their first Big 12 game at home. They had only played 2 games all season away from Fort Worth. But then they themselves run into the buzzsaw that was Baylor when they had to go to Baylor in the opening night of Foster Pavilion there on the Waco campus, the new arena for men's and women's basketball at Baylor. And also Sedona Prince breaking her finger in that game. Did not play then in their next matchup. And so this is a TCU team. They themselves, not a lot of depth. They are going to have to find some other answers. And what does that look like? Well, the schedule doesn't get any easier. And that is the difference and why the Big 12 is so very difficult. Because this team now, after they take on the 10th, they are at Texas, as we said. Then they are at Houston on the 13th. And then it is Kansas State at home on the 17th. 2 road games and then a home game. So this is going to be a tough stretch right here, as TCU has got to figure out who's going to replace Sedona Prince. She had been one of the top 2 scorers coming into the conference season, along with Madison Connor, in the entire league. They had been posting almost 20 plus. She was averaging a double-double. It's so very difficult to take that out of the lineup and then have someone just come in. It's going to have to be by committee. Again, not a lot of depth for Mark Campbell on that roster. What can they do with it? Can they find their footing now after an injury takes someone out? The hope is Prince will be back maybe sometime in February as they get closer to tournament time. Can this TCU team stay above water to get themselves where she can be reinserted into the lineup and give themselves a chance at postseason, especially that NCAA tournament? They had been ranked in the top 25. They fall out, but still are receiving votes. The other team I think that really strikes a note when we look at the rest of this, you have West Virginia, who had been undefeated. They still sit in that top 25. This is a very good team for Mark Kellogg with a lot of pieces of it and one of the most dynamic guards in the country and in the Big 12, and JJ Quinterly. I just love her game, how she plays with such she, like Roy Harmon, has a motor and it goes on both ends of the floor, but also a guard that has come over and has been a big help for Mark Kellogg, came with him from Stephen F. Austin. He's gotten some depth out there, as well as some players in the post that I think really have given them some added boost that they were looking for that they maybe didn't necessarily have. But keep in mind, this is a West Virginia group. They were an NCAA tournament team last season in 1 year under Don Plitzawhite. So they are not unfamiliar to winning and unfamiliar to grinding it out. And that is exactly what you're going to see them have to do over the next couple weeks. West Virginia, they themselves have multiple tough games ahead of them. They play on the 10th at Iowa State, still undefeated in conference play, and then on the 13th at UCF. So a big road trip this week for the Mountaineers. It is Texas Tech and Oklahoma State. They sit at 2-1, and then a host of teams that have not won yet in the Big 12. UCF, Houston, BYU, Cincinnati, the 4 new schools to the league. But then it's Kansas, it's 0-3. And I will tell you, everybody, I said it a few weeks ago, I kind of felt like this Kansas team maybe a little bit underperforming, underwhelming in some of their games. One thing that stood out to me was a big win at home right before the holiday break. They beat Nebraska 69-52, handled the Cornhuskers in Allen Fieldhouse. But then it was just sort of lackluster performances, ones that they couldn't figure out a way to win. And it was the loss at home to West Virginia, and then 2 road losses last week at Iowa State and at Texas Tech. And it puts the Kansas Jayhawks at 0-3 and 7-7. This is a group that won the postseason WNIT last year. We're wanting to use it as a momentum boost, kind of get themselves back on the track into the NCAA tournament. They were picked 3rd in this league. Now, there is a lot of basketball left to be played, but they are going to need more than just Holly Kerskeeter. She is 4th in the Big 12 right now in conference games in scoring. She's been averaging 18 points a game, but they need more. They need Tatiana Jackson to be able to come in and be an impact player on both ends of the floor that she was a year ago for them, a defensive stopper and a scorer. They're going to need more from their guards, and they are going to have to figure out a way to defend. This is a critical week now coming up for this Kansas squad, and it doesn't get real easy because they're going to play 2 very good teams. They've got Baylor and they have Oklahoma State at home. Can the Jayhawks get back on the winning way? We'll have to see where they are a week from now. All right. In just a moment, it's time to jump to the new TV deal that was inked by the NCAA last week that includes the NCAA Women's Basketball Tournament. So what gives? We'll talk about it in just a moment. Well, the NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there is still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet, like same game parlays. You can find bets in the new Explore tab. You can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays, and more. And there's so much going on right now, folks, and everybody knows the NFL playoffs are headed our way starting on Saturday. And yes, I'm in Kansas City, so feel free, go ahead. Put your money on the Chiefs. Think about Travis Kelce only needs 10 yards to get to 1,000. I'm pretty sure that's going to be in a parlay somewhere. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. Hi, everybody. I am Missy Heydrich, and welcome back to Locked On Women's Basketball. Thank you so much for joining us today. We were talking about the Big 12 and all that has been going on. The winds are blowing through the country right now with crazy weather, and the winds have blown through the Big 12. All sorts of movement and action at the top of the standings. But as we said, just one remaining overall undefeated team, and that is the Baylor Bears. They are just 1 of 4 remaining undefeated teams in the nation. They jumped in the polls. They are a top 5 team, in at number 4 in the AP top 25 that was just released about an hour or so ago. And there are 4 undefeated teams in conference play in the Big 12: Baylor, Kansas State, Iowa State, and Oklahoma. Don't take your eyes off any of these teams. There are going to be great games coming up this week. But I want to talk just a few minutes about the new deal that was announced by the NCAA for television rights moving forward that does include the NCAA women's basketball tournament. Last week on January 4th, it was announced that the NCAA and ESPN, that they have a package to televise 40 NCAA championships, which includes women's basketball, volleyball, baseball, and softball. And they will be on the ESPN networks for the next 8 years. This agreement includes rights to 21 women's championships and 19 men's. And it extends a relationship between the NCAA and ESPN that, like ESPN, began when in 1979. ESPN began televising every game of the women's basketball tournament in 2003, and they have carried events such as the College World Series out of Omaha since 1980. Now, one of the biggest factors over this is that, as everyone has known, and it has been made known by NCAA leadership, ultimately as you look forward, and what the NCAA president, Charlie Baker, has said is that over the past years, ESPN has definitely demonstrated an investment in NCAA championship coverage, and that includes the women's basketball tournament. Now, as we have seen the growth of women's basketball come, there has been a lot of conversation about the value and what does that mean, and does women's basketball have enough to stand on its own? Well, it's one of the things that, as you listen to some of the coaches and some of the feedback come about this new deal, everyone is excited. It's always good to be able to see the value and the numbers move forward and move up. That can only be a benefit, not only for women's basketball, but for campuses all across the country with all of these other NCAA championships. We want to be able to see the amazing performances of all student athletes, women's and men's, as they advance to that level in their collegiate career. When it's on TV, it's better for everyone. Now, women's basketball, because of the growth and what we have seen over the last few years, there'd been a lot of idea that it could stand alone, that it might be something of which the NCAA would shop the women's basketball tournament. That didn't necessarily come to be. But it has been indicated by the NCAA and by Charlie Baker that they are committed to adding revenue sharing in women's basketball. Now, that is one thing that has come up a lot, and people say, well, what does that mean? And we hear a lot when we hear about the NCAA men's tournament. They talk about performance units. Well, ultimately, that is a revenue sharing program with the NCAA men's basketball tournament that gives performance units for success in the tournament. In layman's terms, the farther you go in the tournament, the more money you make. Now, that revenue sharing then is about each league. And I want to point to an article that was written in Axios.com back in late March of 2023. And it talked about how the distribution for NCAA revenue works. And every March Madness for the men's tournament, that distributions a portion of its revenue to member conferences based on how their schools fare in the tournament. Those are those units. Again, the farther you go, the more money you make. Last season in 2023, 132 total units were up for grabs, and each was roughly about $2 million. So by the numbers, you got to look at something like the SEC. 8 tournament teams, they played 17 games. The SEC netted $34 million. It was the first time in at least 2 decades that the SEC led all conferences on the men's side. Other big winners, the Big 12, they made $32 million a year ago. The Big East, who just so happened to have the NCAA champion in UConn last year on the men's side, they made $30 million in total. So if we want to start talking about performance units, and this is one direction of which I feel women's basketball wants to move to, and the coaches are in favor of, then you would see How many teams were in from the SEC a year ago? How far they did advance? LSU wins a national title. Obviously, as they continue to go farther, the more money they were going to make, and that would go into that revenue sharing pot. I thought it was an incredibly interesting quote that was given by North Carolina head coach Courtney Banghart. She is president of the Women's Basketball Coaches Association this year. And she said, quote, "How do you tell athletic directors to continue to invest in women's basketball other than out of the goodness of their heart?" End quote. Quote, "No, now once we get money assessed and money attached to postseason success and you get rewarded, it's the next step in bringing other people along too, as AD's hands are forced a little bit more." End quote. So ultimately, it goes back to the investment. It goes back to the investment in women's basketball, how athletic directors, universities, university presidents see the value, and also how sponsors and everyone else sees this, is that revenue sharing might be something that moves forward. But that it was ultimately decided by the NCAA that bundling women's basketball with all of the other championships was the best deal. The value of women's basketball, about 10 times the amount in the previous deal with ESPN that was signed and that is expired, that will expire in August. So absolutely the value rose. When will we get to the position of performance-based units? They believe it's coming. However, it is not just something that can unilaterally be decided. It is a decision that has to be made and has to go through a process, and that the revenue sharing for that to happen has to go to the NCAA Division I Board of Directors Finance Committee. They have to create a proposal, and then the Board of Directors would meet and they would vote on it. More than likely, that is not going to happen heading into this year's 2024 NCAA tournament, but this will be a conversation. Now, keep in mind, one other note as this goes forward, the new deal for the NCAA package with ESPN that includes women's basketball will run out at the same time as the men's deal does, which will allow for greater negotiations for sponsorships for both sports. And at that time, down the road, we may very well see these two tournaments put together and packaged together as a unit. No pun intended, performance units going up for both men's and women's, possibly in the future. We shall see. Is this a good thing for women's basketball? Is it a bad thing for women's basketball? Well, I think we have to look at it on paper and say, yes, that this is a positive, that this is something that we see moving forward, that it is, an amount has gone up, that the value has increased, and that has been recognized through this deal that has been put together with ESPN and the NCAA. Is there opportunity for growth? Was something missed? Most possibly. I feel as though women's basketball could and can stand on its own. It has been shown by multiple reports that have come out that that is the one thing that they can do, that there is a market, that it is a brand, and it is a brand that is resonating not only here, but also internationally, because we see the impact that that has in the professional game moving forward. What happens as this deal will expire? Let's hope. And let's hope within the next year or so, performance units and that success number comes into play in women's basketball, something coaches want, and I'm sure athletic directors and conference commissioners would love to see as well. Well, I want to thank all of you for watching and listening today. You can find me, Missy Heydrich, on X, formerly known as Twitter. And then all of my amazing colleagues, please go over and find us at www.thenexthoops.com. And then you can follow this podcast as well at Locked On WBB. Keep your eyes on the Big 12. Keep your eyes on all the movement as it relates to the NCAA and women's basketball. It continues to be forefront and a big, big piece of the puzzle as we go in college athletics. So thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. So go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Stay safe, everybody. Stay warm wherever this winter weather may be coming upon you. And again, you have one chance tonight, the end of the college football season. It's either going to be the Dogs or it's going to be the Wolverines, a really cute versus a not so cute mascot. We'll see which direction it goes, but you have one more chance for college football tonight. Enjoy. Thanks, everybody.